Doing a little bit of a different take than last night. So last night we did an ending stream on the book Fight Club. We're going in a very different direction tonight. So we're going to be looking at the one that I held up at the beginning there. It's called The Monsters of Templeton. Hopefully you can see the title. By Lauren Groff. Again, very, very different in tone and content and everything, in style and everything from Fight Club. So, The Monsters of Templeton, as far as I know, is essentially the story of a young woman who comes back to her hometown after a long time being away. She comes home pregnant. It turns out that her college professor is the father. And I think most of the story is actually spent with her going through the town's history, trying to find out who her father is. Should be an interesting read. There are a couple of reasons that I came across it. One of them being it is the author's first novel. I was looking through a bunch of works not too long ago, just trying to find a lot of fairly well-reviewed or notable first works from authors, and hers came up. It touches on magical realism just a little bit. I'm going to be talking a lot about magical realism on this stream just because it's one of my own favorite. You can't really call it a genre, but it's a technique in literature that I really, really like, where I found that I don't like straight up fantasy. Sci-fi is kind of okay. I started noticing I liked books where you would have things happen in the story that were inexplicable in the real world. Fantastical elements of some kind that the book sort of just treats as ordinary. You know, they don't call them out. There are no magic systems. There's no spells or wizards or, elves, nothing like that. It is based in ordinary day-to-day contemporary life, but the author doesn't just allow, the author uses maybe kind of strange occurrences to help tell the story. It's something I really enjoy myself in reading. It's something that I'm working into my own book. So it has that going for it a little bit as well. It actually has a blurb on the back from Stephen King. I'm not sure how many first-time authors get that. So Lauren Groff's debut novel, The Monsters of Templeton, is everything a reader... Oh boy, I'm just realizing, making sure I've got the volume turned up. It's everything a reader might have expected from this gifted writer and more. There are monsters, murders, bastards, and ne'er-do-wells, almost without number. I was sorry to see this rich and wonderful novel come to an end. So, Stephen King likes it. I guess maybe that says something about it. Let's see. Ashley typed up some notes tonight, so I wouldn't ramble so much. A couple of other things about it. So this is a little bit of a place story. So it is, some people have described it as a sort of a love letter to the author's hometown. Templeton is a fictionalized version of Cooperstown, New York, where apparently James Fenimore Cooper, the town is named after his family. I haven't read any of James Fenimore Cooper's works. If you don't know who he is, he wrote The Last of the Mohicans. It's probably the most well-known thing that he wrote. Very popular, maybe the most popular American novelist in his time. And the author of this book, I think, has a little bit of a fascination with Cooper, his work, the town. And so part of the reason I'm interested in that, again, is that my first novel that I'm working on is also, not exclusively focused on the place, but there are pretty strong elements of it that are also a little bit of a love letter to where I grew up, down in Humboldt County. So looking to see how another author makes use of that. I think that's probably about all there is to say about it at the outset. Let's go ahead and read an excerpt and see how that goes. And I actually have the chat window up tonight. So I had at least one person leave a comment last night. I should be able to see that as it happens, but I haven't tried that with Facebook yet, so we'll kind of see how that goes. All right. Okay, get to the author's notes. There we go. Chapter 1, Homecoming. And where the application just sort of decides, I'm going to go ahead and just turn myself off. I don't know why, but we're back. So I was going to say, I'm reading an excerpt from Chapter 1 of The Monsters of Templeton by Lauren Groff. I'm reading a sort of a limited excerpt. Given everything around copyright law these days, I think this falls well within fair use. But if the author or publisher doesn't like this, please let me know and I'll happily take down the video. Like they've noticed, but there you go. Chapter 1, Homecoming. The day of return to Templeton, steeped in disgrace, the 50-foot corpse of a monster surfaced in late glimmerglass. It was one of those strange purple dawns that color July there, when the bowl made by the hills fills with a thick fog, and even the songbirds seem timorously unsure of day or night. The fog was still deep when Dr. Clooney found the monster on his morning row. I imagined how it went, the slide of the skull's knife across the lake, the oarheads casting rings on the water, the red bow light pulsing into the dark. Then, sudden, looming over the doctor's shoulder, an island where there had never been an island, the vast belly of the dead beast. Gliding backward, the old doctor couldn't see it. He neared. The bow ball of his boat pushed into the rubbery flesh like a finger into a balloon. The pressure of boat versus skin reached a tensile limit without piercing anything. The boat checked its bowward motion and jerked to stern. The doctor turned, but he was prepared only for the possible, and didn't at first know what was before him. When he saw the large and terrible eye still milking over with death, the good doctor blinked, and then he fainted. When Dr. Clooney came to, the dawn had thinned. The water was shot with bars of light, and he found himself rowing around and around the bellied-up beast, weeping. In his mouth there was a sweet burn of horehound candy, the exact savor of his long-ago childhood. Only when a seagull landed upon the flat chin of the Leviathan and bent to steal a taste did Dr. Clooney return to himself. Only then did he skid back over the water to the awakening town, shouting the news. "Miracle," he called. "Miracle, come, quick, see." At that precise moment, I was idling in the park across the street from Averill Cottage, my childhood home. For at least an hour I had been standing in the depression that the town flooded in winter to make a skating rink, gathering what courage I could. The fog veiled my grand, awkward house with its original cottage from 1793, one wing from Victorian 1890, and another from the tasteless 1970s, turning the whole into something more coherent, almost beautiful. In my delirium, I thought I could see my mother inside with a few lifetimes of family antiques, and the gentle ghost that lived in my childhood room, all traced like bones on an X-ray, delicate as chalk. I felt the world around me creak and strain, snapping apart fiber by fiber like a rope pulled too tautly. Back near Buffalo, I had a glimpse of myself in a rest-stop bathroom and was horrified to find myself transformed into a stranger in rumpled, dirty clothing, my once pretty face bloated and red with crying jags. I was drawn thin, welted with the bites of 1,000 Alaskan blackflies. My hair, shorn in April, was now growing out in weird brown tufts. I looked like some little chick starving, molting, kicked out of the nest for late-discovered freakishness. As the night thinned around me, I leaned over and retched, and I still hadn't moved when down Lake Street there came a muffled trampling sound. I knew before I saw them that the sounds were from the Running Buds, a small, dear band of middle-aged men who jogged around the streets of Templeton every morning in all weather, in ice, in rain, in this fine pelted fog. When the Buds came near, I could hear gentle talking, some spitting, some wheezing over their footsteps. They moved out of the dark into the glow of the single street lamp on Lake Street. And seeing me in the park in my little depression, seeing perhaps something familiar about me, but not quite recognizing who I was at that distance, all 6 of them raised their hands in my direction. I waved back and watched their thick bodies disappear down the street. I found my feet crossing the street, heading up the driveway, passing through the garage doorway, and I opened the door to the mudroom, to the smells of straw and dust and bitter orange, the smells of home. I almost turned around and returned to the car, waited for day. I hadn't seen my mother in more than a year, couldn't afford the trip home, and for the first time since I'd left, she hadn't offered to pay. Instead, though, I came in as silently as I could, hoping to have a few good hours of sleep before awakening her. I placed my shoes beside her white nursing clogs and went through the mudroom, then the kitchen. But although I had expected Vi to be sleeping, she was sitting at the kitchen table with the Freeman's Journal spread before her, her profile reflected in the great plate glass door that looked out over the 2-acre lawn, the lake, the hills. She must have had a night shift, because her feet were in an enamel bowl filled with hot water, her eyes closed, her face hanging above her tea, as if she were trying to steam her features off. They were slipping that way anyhow. At 46, my mother had the worn, pouchy skin of a woman who had done far too many drugs at far too young an age. Her shoulders were slumped, and the zipper in the back of her skirt was open, revealing a swatch of red cotton underwear and a muffin top of flesh above it. From my position in the kitchen door, my mother looked old. If I weren't already holding the pieces together with both squeezed hands, the sight would have broken my heart. I must have moved or swallowed because Vi turned her head and looked at me. Her eyes narrowed. She blinked and heaved a sigh and passed a hand over her face. GD flashback, she muttered. I snorted. She looked at me again, her forehead creasing. No, you're a flashback, Willie. Are you? Not this time, apparently, I said, coming over at her and kissing her on the part in her hair. She smelled antiseptic from the hospital, but deeper there was her own smell, something bird-like, like warm and dusty wings. She squeezed my hand, flushing. You look horrible. What in the world are you doing home? She said. Oh boy, I sighed, and had to look away at the thin curls of fog in the lake. When I looked back, the smile had fallen off her face. I think that's probably good enough, because we get a little sample of a couple different techniques, right? So one of the reasons I started reading beginnings in particular, because I read a lot of, in the last couple of years, I've read a lot of book beginnings where I'll start something, and unlike when, I don't know about you, but like when I was younger, if I started a book, I felt like I absolutely had to finish it. I was obliged to read the whole thing. I couldn't move on to something else. Partially out of a sense of like, oh, well, don't be a quitter, but I mean, there's so much out there to learn from. There's so much out there to read. Like I said before, I'm a very slow reader. I have to be very selective in what I actually read. And so I've been reading a lot of openings, and it's one way that, in one sense, it's a good way to sample different styles, to see different techniques. Since I'm still working on the first portion of my own novel, it's a great way to see like a lot of different starts, like a lot of different ways to do things. Now this one in particular, I had already read the start a little while back, and so had already planned to read the whole thing. But I'll probably be doing more, just beginnings where it's like, we'll kind of end them with the question like, would I read it? Is it going to go on my reading list? For this one, like I said, the main things that were drawing me to it were that it was the author's first novel. It involved there's the monster in the lake, right? There's this thing that, I don't know that personally I would classify this as magical realism, but there is an element of weirdness about it, definitely, it's not a monster story. The monster is just kind of there. From what I understand about the rest of the story, like it probably plays some role, but it's not like, the point of the story is to go hunt down the monster or to find out the secret behind it or something like that. It's just kind of there. It's just kind of part of the background. That's one of the things I like in magical realism, in the same way that maybe a really good description or maybe metaphors and analogies and that kind of language can, in a very concise way, say something deeper, can convey more information in a smaller space. Magical realism is sort of like a larger scale technique that allows you to convey really deep, rich feelings that aren't necessarily about the thing that you're describing. So like the monster in this case, is it really going to be, in terms of the literal telling of the story, clearly it's a carcass in the lake. But is it going to convey something that kind of adds to the emotional vibe of the rest of the story? Hopefully. I guess we'll find out. That's one of the things I'm kind of curious to see. In terms of the language itself, personally, nothing remarkable. In the very first, let me go ahead and actually open it up to the first page again. In the very first paragraph, I maybe place too much importance on the first paragraph. Like, to me, you know, I don't know, maybe not. You've really, really got to hook the reader. You've got to do something that is going to be somehow appetizing. So the day I returned to Templeton, steeped in disgrace. So we have a little bit about the, you know, okay, so there's some of the tension already. The 50-foot corpse of a monster surfaced in Lake Glimmerglass. It was one of those strange purple dawns, so nice description, that color July there, when the bowl made by the hills fills with a thick fog. And so there's a little bit of, she uses a little bit of rhyming and alliteration, mainly here in the first paragraph again, though. Made by the hill fills with a thick fog, and even the songbirds sing timorously, unsure of day or night. It's a nice image. You know, if that kind of imagery holds throughout the book, I think that's a good thing. You know, I think that's one of the reasons I personally go to books. There are some things that I read that are very weak on plot. They're all character, and they're the authors are sentence by sentence writers, so they don't necessarily, like you hear a lot about writers plotting things out and having an outline and making sure that there's 3 acts and things kind of go this way, and you know, you need to have 20% into the novel, you need to have this sort of thing happen. There are a lot of books I really enjoy where there's none of that. There's none of that at all. What you're getting out of the story instead is a more gradual sort of revelation of character, and a revelation of character that is using really, really beautiful, well-structured language to do that. Where if you enjoy a good sentence, which I don't, you know, a very number of people do, those are the books for you. People like, again, Don DeLillo, Cormac McCarthy. Those are the 2 that stand out most to me personally. To a lesser degree, why do I say to a lesser degree? I don't think to a lesser degree. I think that maybe I read more. So Neil Gaiman is another one. I think the only reason I'm tempted to say to a lesser degree is that sometimes I think he intentionally does not do that. But I think it's not like sometimes he nails it and sometimes he doesn't. I think it's a matter of the style of the book. Compare something like, what's a good one? Neverwhere, I believe it's called. Compare that to The Ocean at the End of the Lane. They're very, very different stories. He uses a lot of the kind of language I'm describing in The Ocean at the End of the Lane. Coraline or something like that, he's obviously not going to do that. But anyway, so Neil Gaiman of the 3 tends to be a little bit more plot driven. But even then, not as much as, say, you know, your typical sort of a fantasy genre novel, I think. Anyway, coming back to this, the Monsters of Templeton. So the language to me is important. I need to be able to enjoy the, you know, I don't like things that feel overly plain. I'm actually not a Hemingway fan much at all. Take The Old Man and the Sea and these really short, sort of bland sentences about, you know, there was an old man and he's a boat and a fish. And not really my thing at all. But anyway, so the language looks interesting, but by the time you get to the dialogue in this, I think it starts to weaken just a little bit so far, where I only read a short excerpt of the dialogue here, partially because there's language later. I don't want to, like, I already kind of censor it because that's what I want to do on the stream. That's sort of the level of stuff I want to do on the stream. There's a lot of language later, but it isn't the language that bothers me. It's more the, like, it just doesn't feel natural. It feels a little, maybe it doesn't sound entirely grounded in reality. It doesn't sound natural. So we'll see if that kind of picks up. And again, though, the contrast between the monster, she's obviously getting ready to tell her mom that she is pregnant, and then how we go from there to her looking for information on her father. I don't know, we'll see. I'll be doing some readings later from middles from this thing. Like if I find a scene that I think is especially good if I find some language, that really good use of language that I think is interesting, then I'll be doing some kind of impromptu streams where I'll call those things out. So what about the idea of, the other thing you hear about in advice on story writing is, building tension. And there's so much emphasis placed on that, and sometimes, especially in writers, when it's their first work, the kind of tension they try to build is the explosive sort, where they have you jump right into the scene where someone, without naming the book, one I read recently that was, to me, just a little cartoonish, was someone waking up and there's this grisly description of their spouse lying in bed next to them and they've been murdered, and it's this bloody, and like I was out by page 1, not just because it's gross, but because you have no chance at all to acclimate to the people in the story, to anything like that. So to me, looking at this, so what was the tension building? The first thing is this idea that if you read the inside jacket, you kind of know what it's about. You know that she's getting ready to tell her mom something that her mom probably isn't going to be happy with. And then there's the thing in the lake. Like, how's that going to play in? Or are we meant to kind of forget about that most of the time, and it'll turn up every once in a while just to kind of reorient the scene? Hard to say. Personally, I was fine with the level of, what's moving it forward. Again, being nervous about telling her mom this. But that's going to peter out pretty quick. That's going to get to the point where, that'll get you through chapter 1. I'm very interested in seeing how she goes from that to this quest to find information about her father that then, so far as I know, kind of has to carry the rest of the book. So we'll see. So I think that's about it for tonight. I will be doing some more beginnings. I've got, at the same time I'm reading this, I'm doing a very intentionally slow and studious read of Don DeLillo's Underworld, which is one of the things that his style had such a huge impact on me the first time I read it. So it'd probably be a good example to go through. Like here, I was maybe, like, the language is okay, it's all right. I like some of her descriptions. Whereas with Underworld, it really, really hit me really hard. And what was interesting there is that he's writing about something that I don't know about, I really don't care about in my day-to-day life, where he's writing about people going to a baseball game. It's just not something that I'm interested in, but boy, he really, really captures the moment. So I'll be doing a beginning based on that. There are tons of other really good examples of good writing throughout Underworld that I'll be shouting out. So I'll be doing some of those. And then I think Friday I'm probably going to do my first novel progress blog. So there are some people on Facebook that I know now, or people I used to know a long time ago when I used to write short stories and that kind of thing. So it might be kind of fun to try to arrange a time when we can actually all be on the stream, just kind of talk, what we've been doing. Some of them write, so that'd be kind of fun to talk about. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. So, but until then, thanks for stopping by. Thanks for watching this. By all means, drop a comment again. Get the book up there again, The Monsters of Templeton. I have to look at the name again. Lauren Groff. I don't know why that doesn't stick with me, but it doesn't. There's my little stop button. And let me get that in frame, and we'll end on that picture. Have a good night. God bless.